So today, as you know, our topic is mobility. NVTA is doing a great job for us. The new smart scale that VDOT is using to identify priorities and add transparency to the funding of transportation improvements is working very, very well. But we still need some more help in Prince William County. And so what we want to talk about today is the concept of having a bond referendum for some transportation projects and perhaps some other public improvements that are essential to forwarding business opportunities within the county. Tom Blaser is with us, a longtime transportation expert for Prince William County, as is Supervisor Nohe, and they're going to do a presentation for us today and let us know a little about what it takes to do a bond referendum and their experiences. What did I say?
It's a presentation. We're not that sophisticated.
Yeah.
We hope it's a little more.
They're going to talk to us.
We're in a conversation.
They're going to talk to us, maybe set us straight, curb our enthusiasm, but help us to understand what it would take to make those sorts of opportunities available to our citizens and our businesses in the county. Tom, if you could start us off, we appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sherman, and thank everybody for coming out and having us discuss this important topic. Prince William County, really the infrastructure that we have and are fortunate to have today, really dependent on local road bonds. And Prince William County was at the forefront of that back in '88. Very, very rare, still is rare, but at that point in time it was kind of earth-shattering that a local government in the Commonwealth would go ahead and take the initiative to provide local infrastructure, because it was traditionally just a VDOT responsibility, and local governments wanted to stay away from the responsibility and, I guess more importantly, the cost. But this community was situated in such a way, commuting is a heavy part of everybody's daily life. Relative incomes are good, and the frustration level of trying to get up to the Pentagon or wherever it was people were going back in 1986 when the road bond failed the first time was so high that we thought, from a staff perspective and the board, under the board's direction, thought that if this was ever going to get done, VDOT couldn't handle it. VDOT didn't have the funding. VDOT, frankly, didn't have the motivation, and we competed with the other jurisdictions in Northern Virginia for what state money was available. Again, we developed another bond initiative that was put on the ballot in 1988, and there was a lot of thought that went into that in terms of what projects we would put out there. Again, it was very different from competing with the surrounding jurisdictions, because when you're talking at the Council of Governments with people from Montgomery County, Maryland, Fairfax County, and you're talking about how bad the traffic is on Minnieville Road, nobody has an appreciation for that unless you're the guy sitting in Minnieville Road. I mean, they don't know where it is. They could, they don't give a damn. So again, we had to rely on ourselves, and that was one of the keys about how you developed a project list. Obviously, you look at ADTs, average daily traffic. It's going to be a barometer for where you start. But then the other thing that people regionally didn't understand was just congestion. At that point in time, we didn't have the Prince William Parkway, it was just Davis Ford Road. And while our volumes were 6,000, 8,000, maybe 10,000 vehicles a day, which regionally isn't a big number, because it was only a 2-lane road, you couldn't get from Manassas to Woodbridge. And if it was slick or wet or snowy, it was a cluster. I mean, it was bad news. So congestion, obviously, and again, when you think about somebody going in the booth and pulling a knob that says this may raise my taxes a bit or take away from school funding or park funding or whatever is else a priority for that family or that voter, you want to have a project in there that goes, yeah, I sit in traffic every GD day. And yeah, that's something I can get behind, that's something I'm going to vote. Safety was obviously one of the concerns again when this was a suburbanizing community or urbanizing community, a growing community, let me put it that way, that was being served by infrastructure that was literally on glorified cow trails. I mean, Davis Ford Road, I keep going back to that, the Minnieville Road, Smoketown Road. I don't want to date myself too bad, but they were two-lane, unsafe roads. Spriggs Road was a good example. Not too recently, there was a one-lane wooden bridge across Powell's Creek. So that's kind of what we were dealing with. So safety was a big issue. And also when picking the projects, you wanted to make sure they were serving key landmarks, whether it was a school, a park, later, we had innovation, those kinds of things. And then also what you wanted to look at was acceptability. You didn't want to have a project on the list that was going to get everybody all riled up against the whole list. Whatever that project may be, but when you're building roads, you're going to anger some people. Some people, if it's going in their backyard, if it's touching a park, if there's a multitude of reasons that people do not want to see roads. They create noise. There's a whole list of things that people can get upset about when roads are impacting their life. So you want to stay away from those, obviously. It can torpedo a whole program. And to some extent, the Davis Ford Road Initiative in 1986 did just that. So in '88, we got a little smarter in terms of the projects we put in there. And also, we got a little smarter about geographic equity. Again, as most of you probably know, historically there's been a West and an East Prince William, and the traffic problems were heavily biased toward the east. And so that's where, from a traffic perspective, that's where a lot of the project was, but we lost a lot of voters in the west because we didn't have enough out here to get those votes, frankly. I mean, it's pretty obvious. And so again, we came up with a program that was a little more balanced and had what we referred to as geographic equity. Marty would understand that there was a little piece of the pie for every district. So, and that was important too, because the first thing the board did was form a citizens committee, which was very, very key. The board appointed 2, 3, I mean, there was no set limit, but these were folks that were bullish, and they wanted it, and it wasn't some paid transportation geek coming into your living room. It was their neighbor saying, we got to do it, and this is the reason why. And to that end, this committee did a hell of a lot of work. I was out, virtually every night. Had a young family at the time, and but anyway, we were in living rooms, library rooms, basketball courts, backyards, wherever people would have us, just educating people. And you can imagine we were a very, and still are, a very tax-conscious community, and people couldn't understand why we were going to take on this burden as a community when traditionally it was a statewide thing. But when you made the argument that, look what the state has given you over the last 20 years, virtually nothing, and when we can spread this payment out over 20 years, so your family who might not be here in 20 years won't be paying, but you will be getting the benefit, and the incremental value is a very attractive thing for you. And again, just the frustration of sitting in traffic just created a synergy that was able to come, what I would call, the distrust of government that goes on, is still very prevalent today, that we could do this. And we were able to get the community supported it. I can't remember what the vote was, but it was pretty comfortable. I think it was 65% of the vote, and I can't remember, was 06 a presidential election? No. So it was really, a localized thing. And another thing we learned from '86 when we lost was we put it, I think, with parks. There was one pull. We put it with parks, or it might have been a library. I think we wanted to build.
In '86?
Yeah,
Yeah, it was this big overall infrastructure package.
And it got a little ambiguous, and we didn't name specific projects from where to where. And I guess, I think that, retrospect might have fed into the distrust as well, that we weren't as forthcoming or transparent is the word today about what was going to be done with the money. And so, again, we got very, very specific in '88 and said exactly what we were going to do. We gave costs for every project. We gave schedules for every project. And, fortunately, we were able to perform. I don't know, Rick or Marty, that's really, I don't have a beginning.
It's pretty good overview.
I think, Tom, if you remember, in 2002, VDOT put out a referendum at the same time we did.
Right.
And obviously you had done such a good job doing all the other roads that in VDOT, that was the first referendum. VDOT referendum didn't pass, but our referendum passed with a nice majority, if you remember correctly. And if I remember correctly, Marty, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but the VDOT referendum didn't even pass in Prince William County.
So there's a little kind of a strange thing. There was in 2002, so Prince William County had done a referendum in '86, which failed, but then we had one that passed in '88, in '90, in '92, 88, 90, 94, 98, and then '02 was the fifth time, and then we passed a sixth one in '06. '02 was very interesting. There was a regional referendum for all of Northern Virginia that was handled poorly, bluntly, by the General Assembly, because it was packaged as a tax increase referendum, which will pay for roads, as opposed to in Prince William County, where we had a road building referendum, which could have some impact on your tax bills. What was fascinating about it was there was a lot of belief on the part of the General Assembly and the Secretary of Transportation's office that part of the reason the regional initiative would pass was because the inside the Beltway jurisdictions, Arlington, Alexandria, most of Fairfax, would sort of take the attitude of, we need the infrastructure so badly, the taxes won't matter, whatever it takes, just get us the infrastructure. And that the outer jurisdictions, specifically Prince William, would say, well, we've got this local road bond going on, if we have the state road initiative going on, they'll just carry each other across the finish line. And Loudon will probably have to just disregard them. I think there wasn't a ton of population. I mean, Loudon's grown tremendously since then. I share that saying. What was fascinating about the outcome was our local road bond passed like 65-35. I mean, it was a landslide. However, I was served on a citizens commission involved the previous iterations of the two chambers model, but it was, I was part of a commission that involved the county government and the chambers to advocate for that referendum. Meanwhile, the state referendum didn't just fail, it failed by similarly large margins. I mean, it was like 55% no vote throughout the region and 60% no vote in Prince William or something like that, which means that there was like if you do the math, there was like 25% there was a chunk of the population that said no to both. And there's a chunk that said yes to both. But like 25-30% of the population of this county basically said, we trust Prince William County to do the right thing on the roads. We don't trust the state to do the right thing with the roads. And violated everyone's expectations. By the way, I was one of those people. I was on the committee to advocate for the local initiative, but meanwhile, I was a political activist in another part of, sort of wearing a different hat, saying, but don't vote for the state one. And finally, they had not learned the lessons that I think we had learned in Prince William. What they did was the state, I'm sort of, Monica Backman, the executive director of the NVTA, and I were sort of the beneficiaries of those mistakes at the time. What they did was that we're going to raise your taxes and we're going to build these very specific and bluntly very parochial projects. All of the projects were in the legislative districts of powerful delegates and senators. Okay. Some of them were really important projects, but it became clear that there was a strongly political component of it, and that the project list wasn't being driven by what the citizens wanted, it was being driven by what the legislators wanted. But that money would have flowed through the newly created at the time Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. But the NVTA would have been just a body to oversee the expenditure of funds, which it essentially would have already been allocated. Jump forward to 2000, that failed. They never dissolved the NVTA. In 2007, another piece of legislation passed that would have given the NVTA, would have given us more regional money, or some regional money, but with the NVTA in control of those funds. That legislation also eventually went away, and we kind of lived in the wilderness for a few more years. In 2013, the NVTA finally had the funding we need to start doing some big projects, and I was at the Economic Development Committee a few weeks ago talking about that. But the success that I think that we've had at the NVTA and the early failures of doing a regional initiative and the early failures of doing a local initiative was that the projects were driven by, and I don't want to sound too cynical about it, we're driven sort of by political instinct, which is important, but without as much regard as there should have been for what do the citizens think is going to solve their problems, and without much in the way of evaluation. There was a lot of, well, we all know this road is a good project. And I think we can now retrospectively, frankly at this point, 30 years later, look back and say, well, how do we know that was a good project? And I'll say, frankly, that the 88 road bond, the first one that passed, was largely about building the Prince William Parkway, by which I mean if you've lived here, most of you haven't lived here long enough, but the southernmost part of the Prince William Parkway is essentially a long series of disjointed road realignments. If you lived in Prince William County in the 80s, you would have started at Route 123 in Occoquan, and just follow this route in your head. Drive up Old Bridge Road until you get to Minnieville and turn left. Turn right on Elm Farm, turn right on the Prince William Parkway, make that wide left to stay on the Prince William Parkway. Turn right onto Davis Ford Road, turn left onto Yates Ford Road, turn right onto the Parkway, run up what is now, I can't remember the name of the street, but it's the street, if you all know Desi and Sherry Arnaz, it's the residential street they live on, and then terminate at what is now Liberia. That long, complicated trip I just described was Davis Ford Road. And so the southern half of the Prince William Parkway project was realigning all those little pieces of other roads to turn them into and so that we could justify the building of the Prince William Parkway. There were pieces of that that looking back weren't the right, maybe not been the right project, and I'll suggest as an example. If you look at the fact that Fairfax County never gave us better access on Henderson and Clifton roads, the work that we've done that used to be in my district and is now in Ruth's district to build this like 6-lane highway that is now Yates Ford Road in Prince William, it's great once you're back in Prince William, but it doesn't do much in your morning commute. There was not a lot of empirical evaluation of it. There was a lot of instinct. And I think that what we've proven largely through the process we use at NVTA, and I would argue to a slightly lesser degree, but it's still important, the process is used with Smart Scale at VDOT to evaluate projects for their cost effectiveness. We have the opportunity to really now be very transparent in terms of here's why these projects are important. And I say this, I don't want to suggest that like the work that Tom was doing and that the previous boards were doing wasn't good work. It was extremely good work. The technology didn't exist at the time, and as Tom pointed out, we were revolutionary. I mean, we were inventing a way to fund infrastructure projects. I mean,
seat of the pants is another way.
sort of. I mean, I remember when I was first on the board, Tom, we were working on the 06 bond, and Tom shared with me something to the effect of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, something to the effect of, part of the reason the state was so supportive, the state was initially a little threatened by us building the parkway, but the reason they let us go ahead and do it, they granted us all kinds of design exceptions, was at the end of the day, they thought we wouldn't do it. They thought we'd go through the whole process and then go, no, we can't. And then what we did is we actually proved that local governments can do this work as every bit as well as, and in some cases better than the state. Because we built a road in this county, and this is credit to Tom and now credit to Rick, is we build a better road in a faster time frame at a lower price than VDOT can, period. I mean, VDOT does great work, but we do better work in terms of building roads and other infrastructures. And I'll kind of depart into the second act here, but so I think the question that, so a few weeks, about a month ago, I guess, maybe a little, it was late June, we spent almost our entire board afternoon session getting a presentation from Rick Canizales about sort of how a project goes from idea to reality. Someone says we need to widen this road, add this turn lane, construct this new interchange, whatever it is. How do we go from we think this is a good idea to bulldozers rolling and people getting to work, and then ultimately people getting to work faster? As Ruth said, we want to move people. It's not, we don't want to build roads. We want to move people, or move goods and services. So we had this great, Rick gave us a great presentation. I think the whole board benefited from here, sort of understanding the processes of what the makings of a successful project. And we talked about specific projects. How do we get this project that I want off the ground? Part of the answer that Rick shared, that I shared sort of from my Northern Virginia Transportation Authority perspective, was there are projects in Prince William that we probably intuitively believe are good projects. In some cases we have data to prove they're good projects. In some cases we could probably collect data if we don't have it to prove they're good projects. But which, frankly, it is not realistic in the short to medium term to think that the Commonwealth Transportation Board or the NVTA is going to provide funding for it. And there might be any number of reasons why that's the case. The most common reason that would be the case is because in Northern Virginia, there's a score, NVTA and VDOT use a scoring system to determine which projects provide the most bang for the buck. NVTA gives 45% of our scoring purely to the question of the projects that relieve the most congestion, right? We do this analysis, 45% is congestion relief, and then we add that into the question of cost. Right? It's actually a fairly simple mathematical equation. Although it looks really simple. Monica actually has like 6 staff people who spend months and months trying to generate the data so that we can do this really simple math problem, and then we politicians get to look smart. It just looks smart, I didn't say be smart. The VDOT has a system where different parts of the state get different weighting. In Bristol and Martinsville, your project gets 5% of its score from how much congestion it relieves. But it gets 50% of its score from how much economic development it generates. In Northern Virginia, 45% of your score is linked to congestion relief, which is a good thing for us. It means our projects are competitive at the state level because we have a lot of congestion to relieve. But only a sliver, I think it's on the order of 5%, maybe it's 10%, of our project funding from the state is based on how many jobs it creates or how much tax base it generates for our region. And we have projects here in Prince William that fall more into that economic development category than they fall into the congestion relief category. And I could rattle off a couple of examples. I can't sit here today and prove that these are the right projects, but I would look at, as a couple of examples, creating, VDOT is right now widening Route 1 in North Woodbridge between Mary's Way and Fairfax County line. But they're not funding the flyover to get people from 123 into Belmont Bay, which is because the only congestion it relieves is for people who live in Belmont Bay. And that's a pretty small segment of the population. But there's a huge amount of undeveloped commercial property down there where we can see office buildings and a town center in Belmont Bay that will never happen without a flyover. In Ruth's district, the NVTA has provided some initial funding to Telegraph Road and Summit School Road, which we're doing because it gets people to the commuter lot. We need to take people off the interstate, so we want to get them to that commuter lot more quickly and more efficiently. But when it's built, it will also provide access to that Parkway Employment Center, that area in the corner of Telegraph and Caton Hill Roads. I want to say Horner Road all these years later. Corner of Caton Hill and Telegraph Roads, where we've got, again, commercial office areas that aren't going to develop because it's too hard to get in and out of. And I can come up with other examples, access to Potomac Shores, University Boulevard, not far from here, perhaps Route 15 here. Actually, that bridge that you and I have been talking about for years. But suddenly, which are just not strong projects on a pure congestion relief basis, but are nonetheless important to this community. And bluntly, the only way we're going to get those projects done, I believe, at least in the foreseeable future, is to find ways to fund them locally. And now that the General Assembly has taken away our ability to compel developers to build those facilities through the proffer system, we need to, I think, go back to the way we used to do things, and that we stopped doing because the economy kind of went south on us, and it was just kind of hard to get projects done at that point. But I think we need to go back and take a look at, is there an opportunity come, I would say 2020, to revisit this way of funding infrastructure. And given our current sort of where we are as a community, I would look at it from the perspective of the strongest projects are the ones that will ultimately pay for themselves. Building infrastructure that creates a lot of jobs here in the county will, over time, generate more tax revenue from those economic development projects than we'll be putting them into the construction. Now, that sounds great, and I'm not sure that we're going to find a project that fully pays for itself in economic development. But I think that's got to be where the focus is going to need to be on this. And I think when I brought this issue up at that board meeting back in June, Ross was sitting in the audience, and not maybe completely unexpectedly, like 12 minutes later, Ross is like, all right, you need to come to the August Public Policy Committee meeting so we can talk about this. But he's right, because bluntly, going back to the earliest days of our road bonds, the Chamber of Commerce has been, back then it was the Chambers. The Chamber now has been an integral part of this. We need the business community to help articulate why these projects are important. Because the last thing I'll say, the last piece I'll sort of talk about on the policy side is this. Prince William County has set some very ambitious economic development goals. We've talked about them as a chamber in this room, and I think the board some of us may have to revisit some of those goals because they're we didn't define them very well. We said, let's create an ambitious goal and not tell you how to get there. So we're going to be revisiting some of those goals, but they're going to continue to be ambitious. Whatever they are, we're going to continue with economic development ambitions. Here's the problem. So, I was here a few weeks ago talking about how happy I was to have gotten $100 or so million to just in Prince William County and another $100 million in Fairfax County to improve congestion on Route 28. Danica's been talking about this during her campaign, during the General Assembly session. Route 28 is the most important project in Northern Virginia. Full stop. I have to say that, but here's the catch. Let me tell you the flip side of that. It's the most important project, except that the reason it's the most important project is so that our residents can get to their jobs in Fairfax County faster. I am not backing down from my belief that it's the most important project, and as long as I am our county's representative for the NVTA, it will be my top priority, and the numbers show we did a pretty good job of making it our top priority. We got more money than we could, frankly, we have about as much money as we could possibly spend right now on this. I mean, Rick's sort of looking at me going like, I feel some pressure, I don't know how I'm going to spend this money because these projects take a long time. But what it does very little, frankly, to get Prince William County residents to say, to heck with the job in Fairfax, I'm going to find a job here in Prince William, or I'm going to move my company to Prince William. Not saying we shouldn't do it, but it doesn't create jobs in Prince William. Projects like University Boulevard, connecting the three just separate sections of University Boulevard through innovation, that creates jobs. Bringing people up Telegraph Road to the Parkway Employment Center, that's going to create jobs. Getting people into Potomac Shores, where there's a campus set up. Potomac Shores has an area where you could build, where the federal GSA could move the entire Department of Agriculture to Prince William County, and it would be a good idea for them, by the way, okay, to do so, where there will be a VRE station, but no one can get across Route 1 into Potomac Shores to go there. So I think that if we're serious about having ambitious economic development goals, the model we have to look at, frankly, is the Chinese model. I hate to say, let's be like the communist China, but what they're doing is they're saying, we're putting all of our energy in infrastructure. We're putting all of our energy in infrastructure so that because once you can move goods and services around, people will want your goods and services. But having goods and services means nothing if people can't get them, and you can't get into your markets. So, love preaching.
It's very helpful.
Yeah.
And I like the projects that you named. They're all, it seems to me, those are all obvious, high-profile opportunities for creating some opportunity for economic development. Does anyone have any comments or input that they want to provide?
Yeah, I guess this
We'll
is more,
walk around.
Prince William County has a great deal of competing infrastructure needs. And when I point to the schools have a CIP, a 10-year CIP, that essentially, it's based on anticipated bond capacity and growth. And essentially what it has, 10 years from now, we're still going to have 200 trailers. We're still going to have 28 to 35 kids in elementary classes. And we're going to have 30 to 40 kids in our high school classes. And our bond capacity currently is we have about 1.5 of bonding capacity to get, within the 10%. So we have this, we have a transportation needs, or, anybody that drives in Prince William County understands that. We also have this, problem with our schools.
Yeah.
And when we're using bonding capacity to build roads, that's going to come out of bonding capacity, lack of bonding capacity for schools.
So, Sean,
It's a little off topic.
No, actually, I'm really glad, and I'm really glad you asked that, because this is something, again, sort of the setup to the agenda was talking about a mobility bond. And by the way, Tom sort of talked earlier about road bonds, because that's what we've always done. I'm not 100% sure that what I'm talking, and I want to come back to schools just real quick, I'm not 100% sure it's just a road bond, right? I'm not sure that it doesn't also include funding for some transit capital as well. Maybe this bond also includes a new VRE station, or additional, I hope we don't yet need a third garage for PRTC. But we're in the process of building a second garage for PRTC, which is a good thing. So it may be transit driven too. It actually may be technology driven. Maybe that what we need is more technology to support telework. I'm not sure. There's a piece we've got to figure out. The school piece is really important. I'm glad you brought it up, because it's a absolutely vital part of the conversation here. And that's why I'm glad you said it. And it's just that it wasn't where my brain was wired when I woke up this morning, because we're talking about a mobility bond. So, a couple of observations. You're right about, I don't have your numbers in front of me, but on the order of magnitude, you're right. We have a huge problem. We have a lack of. We need more mobility capacity, mobility capital. We need more school capital by a lot. Ruth is served very well on a committee. Not every member of the committee has shown up at all the meetings, but Ruth is like our perfect attendance person on a school board / board of supervisors joint commission to figure out how to address these school capacity issues. Couple of observations. Let me put on my chamber board of directors hat for a minute specifically. I think that if this chamber, this committee, and ultimately the board of directors decides, yes, let's support this initiative, let's dive in. First, I think it has to happen soon. Waiting until 2020 to say, let's do a bond this year, it's too late. Because we're updating our comprehensive plan for transportation over the next year or so, and that process is kind of underway at the staff level. And the board will be seeing more of it. And we can't really pick projects until the comp plan is updated, but as we're updating the comp plan, we need to be thinking about how we're going to pay for these things. That same argument applies to the schools. We're updating our comp plan for school capital and the expectations. And part of it, and something, again, I'll throw a little more credit to Ruth. Ruth brought up at the board meeting, I think that a lot of our estimates for student population growth are just wrong. We've got areas of the county where we're saying, oh, we're going to have this huge population growth, but there's not a place where there's no new houses coming, so why do we think the population is going to grow? We have other areas, so we've got to reevaluate those things. But the school capital is absolutely critical. And they have to go hand in hand, because building a new road, building a new transit facility should help our economic development. It means nothing if we're also not improving our schools. Okay? Our schools have to be getting better too all the time, because those are the two things. What employers want is, can my employees get to work on time every day? Will they want to live in this community? And frankly, two things drive, when companies think about relocating, two things drive the question of, is this a good community for locating? Will my employees want to live here? Which means, will my employees want to send their children to school here? That's what that really means. Housing affordability ties into it a little bit too. The other question is, as the CEO of the company, will my wife want to live here? Or husband? and I'm not joking, that actually is a really big thing. Electrolux Appliances moved to Atlanta, Georgia because the CEO's wife wanted to live in Atlanta, Georgia. And they make jokes about it to this day. But those are quality of life issues. Okay, so we have to do that in schools. We probably, it might end up eventually making sense to do so. We don't use referenda to justify borrowing money to build schools. And it's because in Virginia we don't have to. There are legal mechanisms in place that allow us to issue bonds for schools without going to the voters. We must go to the voters for permission to issue bonds for transportation. To your other point, Harry, the other thing about sort of the bond capacity. So as a percentage, we cap our bond capacity at 10%. We never want the service on our debt to exceed 10% of our total annual expenditures. That's part of the reason we have 3 AAA bond ratings from Wall Street. In the case of transportation, we are Prince William, and it's very Prince William specific. I mean, we are the word unique sometimes gets used to mean special. I don't mean special. We are in a unique situation in Prince William. We're the only jurisdiction that has this. Because of the way the General Assembly chose to allocate money for Metro. They took a big chunk of money from the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, moved over to Metro, which means the NVTA has fewer revenues. But that money that comes from the NVTA to Metro is only being taken from the share of the pie to NVTA, which was being put in by Loudoun, Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria, Falls Church, Fairfax City. Manassas Park, and Prince William, the money that the other jurisdictions have to move out of NVTA into Metro now flows to Prince. Well, starting a month and a half, 6 weeks ago. We haven't gotten $1 yet. We won't see actual money for several more months, but the money is building up in accounts right now. That money that in other jurisdictions can no longer be used for capital projects, now has to go to Metro. In Prince William's case, is coming directly to us as new local funds. The other thing they did to local governments, to fund Metro, is they required that the Metro jurisdictions increase their local contribution. And those local governments are largely just taking the money out of their local transportation funds, be they funds, there's a piece of the NVTA money that flows back to the localities. Largely they're taking their Metro funding from that chunk of NVTA funds that the local boards of supervisors control, leaving them with very little in the way of locally controlled revenues for which the board can choose what to do with it. Because they're being forced to spend any discretionary transportation money on Metro. That didn't happen to us. There is a requirement, but it's a requirement we sort of applaud. Some of that new money we must use for transit generally. That'll help us do some expansions with our OmniRide bus service, with OmniLink, with VRE. It might actually someday end up supporting our ferry service if we decide to go down that path. It could support our Wheels to Wellness program, which is mobility for individuals with disabilities needing to get to medical appointments. But it's nothing of the magnitude. So, longer answer than maybe expected. My vision would be that at first, we would use these locally controlled transportation-specific revenues that at this point, Prince William is the only jurisdiction that has them, to support the debt service in the front years so that it's not competing against that same debt capacity that could be used for schools. Then, if it works, if our theory is a good one, by the time you get to the back end of those bonds, we will have achieved the economic development that we said we wanted to generate through these investments, and the additional commercial tax revenue coming from that economic development becomes the source of the revenue for those transportation bonds. It's a little complicated. Those of you who know me know you don't come to Marty Nohe for short answers. Okay. That's my new mantra, by the way. I want that on my tombstone. You don't come to Marty Nohe for short answers. But because we absolutely can, and wearing my chamber board hat, if this chamber does say yes, let's be at the front edge of this, let's lead on this. Let's get with the board of supervisors and say, we the chamber want to be on church. I would say as a chamber board member, the message to be, we the chamber are committed to mobility investment and education investment, and do both. And in the case, of mobility, we need to be looking specifically at this referendum. I'll also note as a side note, I actually think it someday might make sense for us to actually do referenda for school bonds as well, not because we're required to, but if we do them through referenda, we can actually do locally issued bonds. Right now, the reason we don't need a referenda is that we have the state issue the bonds, and then we sweep those bonds up and then bring them into our local budget, which is great, but we've got our own AAA bond rating. We can probably get lower rates on our bond issuances by doing them locally rather than going through the state, right? But I mean, but like I'm not in a position to say let's do that today, because like the people who are way smarter than me haven't done the math on that. So.
Okay, education is important. We need to, we probably need to have a meeting on that specific topic and how that plays into. Ms. Rome had a question?
I don't have a question, I just wanted to add something
Okay,
that Marty
all
said.
right.
The other thing about the bond capacity or the amount of money that actually is used is that, if you remember, Marty, that in 2006, there was a $300 million bond, but at the end of the day, because we were able to leverage some money, we only took about $168 million in debt out of those $300 million, and the rest we were able to fund off of other funding sources. So that may also happen in this situation. We just don't know that, and it's not guaranteed, but it's a possibility that it's happened for the 2002 bond and the 2006 bond.
Good point. Go ahead.
So I want to make a couple comments and observations and stuff, and then I've got a couple questions. Actually, I'll leave one question, which is, right now, the commercial to residential property, or it's residential property tax split right now is what, 86-14 was the last number I saw?
Something like that, if all you look at is real estate property tax.
Right.
But real estate property tax isn't the only revenue we have, so it's a little tricky. But
Well, right, what I'm trying to get at is basically that, I remember from when I was reporting that the county stated goal was 75-25, and now there's like the moonshot idea that it's 65-35, right? But we're clearly inching up closer to 90-10. And when you had mentioned before the idea of like, look, we have these economic development, packages that would be, or if we have these road funding, these road projects that help out economic development, that'd be huge. And a big part of that in this area is actually going to be more aligned with mass transit, for example. When we look at Innovation Park and the fact that we don't have BRE or any rail service that goes out there yet, we lost the FBI headquarters in the first round specifically because we didn't have Metro Rail, but with one word change in the federal code on this so that Metro Rail turned into commuter rail, had we had BRE, we could have made a very competitive case for it, but we lost out in the first round on that. We lost out on Apple because of this as well. We've lost out on Amazon where we haven't even been able to compete for these things, and they're going to other places in Northern Virginia. It seems that one of the transportation priorities that we're going to have is finding a way to shave down that cost of that VRE expansion from $660 million, which is what the board was looking at last year, out to 11 miles out to Haymarket, to bring that down. So I put in a resolution this year, HJ 66, which was intended to basically compare what it is that Virginia does with rail projects throughout the state versus best practices out of Japan and Switzerland, which are two of the leading areas. In Switzerland, for example, 25% of their commuters go by train to work every day, which is something that we will just not have here ever. But the whole point of that was what can we do to bring down that cost? And so I think as we're looking at bonding, as we're looking at what options do we have in the future here, that mass transit component, especially dealing with VRE, we're gonna have to examine that in terms of how do we get it to Innovation Park, because we're just not gonna be able to compete with part of that Loudon Fairfax group as well as that Crystal City group that right now are competing for these big projects that we're not getting. And I think you also made a great point with when one of the big things when we're dealing with 28, for example, is that if, let's say you're Amazon, you want to locate into that Loudon Fairfax area near 28, a lot of those 50,000 people will end up living in Prince William County. But if 28 itself is not improved by then, if we had other issues by then that's going to make our bid a lot less competitive. Now, fortunately, the NVTA just screwed up, I think it's $121 million for RFB improvements, which is great. And obviously, we have more work to do. Again, put in another resolution dealing with Yorkshire with that. But we've got to be able to look at bringing home those jobs in order to keep this traffic off the road in the first place that's causing this. This is absolutely vitally linked. And when we have that more commercial property development, then we're going to have that more commercial residential property tax that comes with it, or that commercial property tax that comes with it that we can then put into schools, for example. So basically, transportation goes to economic development, goes to education. It is a direct line with all that. So I just kind of want to asking for this point, what are we gonna be looking at, in this bond package? What are gonna be the top things that, we're gonna be examining here, what's been finalized or what's just been hypothesized at this point?
This group of people, I mean,
Right.
this room of people knows more, based on what we've talked about already, knows more about this. You all know more, coming to your question, you all know more about this than anyone, including the county executive right now. Because this title, there's been this is literally an idea at this point. And Tom, that's pretty normal, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's a groundswell, and it comes from groups like this, and the board will, in my experience, will take its keys from the community.
All right, well, I just want to mention with that, one of the big problems we had with this past General Assembly session, well, two major problems. One, the metro part, where we gutted an extra $35.1 million in NVTA funding, and what we should have, on top of the $45 million that we were already, that NVTA was already contributing. We're going to be trying to fix that in 2019. We're going to give it another shot. And downstate people have got to understand that their projects will be competing for Northern Virginia money through Smart Scale if they don't approve the governor's recommendations on this, and the 5 additional cents on the grantor's tax for the MVTC Metro Compact jurisdictions, not Prince William Manassas Park, as Supervisor Nohe talked about earlier, and the 1% on the TOT, which is basically the transit occupancy tax. So basically an extra $1 on a $100 a night hotel stay, which again our residents are not going to be paying. So the other problem that we had was that there was one proffer bill that came up. Delegate Mark Sickles carried it for Fairfax County, because the Fairfax County wanted to deal with proffers. Our Prince William lobby folks, that bill went through my subcommittee on county, cities, and towns. They never told me Prince William signed on to it, never asked me for my vote, never stopped by my office to deal with it. Didn't find out about it until Rich Anderson was standing right outside of the door. Said, "Hey, what you here for?" "Oh, I'm here to lobby for this bill because Prince William just signed on for it, and my wife will kill me if I'm not here for this."
That was a personal direct order.
So I ended up being the only person to vote for this bill that ended up dying, cross-party line otherwise. So then I asked their Prince William lobbyist, "Do you know where my office is?" She said, "No." That's a huge, huge problem. Delegate John Bell in the 87th, his Loudoun folks come up to him every single day updating about what they're working on for the General Assembly, what things that they need to know. Our Prince William folks sat out the game this year for way, way, way too long, and we have to have better communication up and down from January 9th, that first day, until February 23rd, in this 2019 session. We have got to have a lot better communication, because when we don't, then Prince William County projects fail, and bills that are important to Prince William County fail because of that.
Thank you. We do need to be very conscious of the fact that we need to knit all the different programs for transportation that are going on in the General Assembly and VDOT, and we need to pull them, NVTA, pull them all together and keep them in mind as we talk about bonding, the road bonds.
Sure.
Are there,
Just
yeah.
one other point that Delegate Ron brought up, the proffers, is that what we've done historically is match a lot of the road bond capacity with proffer money that was in the salad days of conditional zoning. There was a good chunk of money, and we did a lot of good stuff with those transportation proffer funds, and that is not going to be the case going forward. So that also speaks to perhaps the need for a local transportation bond.
Route 15 in Haymarket, perfect example.
Yeah.
Route 15 north of 66 would be a cow trail today if it weren't for, bluntly, these guys sort of saying, we're going to oppose your houses unless we get a really divided highway out of it. And we did. But
I'm sorry.
Any other, that's fine. That's good. That's helpful. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions? Yes, ma'am.
One thing, while you're talking about these roads, keep in mind that half of our county is now in a rural crescent, okay, which means there's no development. It has an environmental cloud on it. When I bought my property, and my choice was 10 acres plus, suddenly I find myself with this environmental cloud on the property, and you can't do anything, you can't develop anything more. Anyway, I think you're all probably well aware of this. This is up for a vote. If you're talking about more and better infrastructure, if you're talking about economic development and the need for housing for people who live here, who want to work here and live here, we have a lot of land available that no one can use. And I think it's unfortunate, I don't know that it's even legal, that you can take somebody's property, slap a cloud on it, and tell them they can't use it for 20 years. Now we have a choice coming up that we may not be able to use this land again. The landowners may not be able to use their land again for 20 acres. If you want roads going through this part of the county, it's going to be a major problem because we're counting butterflies, you know, and we can't use the land for productive use. And that's what it's there for. We have growth in Fairfax, growth in Stafford County, growth in Loudoun County. And here we are, we're going to sit in Prince William County as podunk in between the growth. And it's a shame. I think we have a lot of possibilities. All these ideas are great. But we have more thinking to do about what we have here available for use and what landowners have a right to use.
I think we're hearing a little bit of what Tom described to us as being a challenge in 1986 and some of the earlier bond referendums is there are a lot of valid, very valid things that people are concerned about in the community. And we need to make sure that those are addressed, as well as being sure that we're focusing on infrastructure that will promote business growth, which I think will address some of the other concerns we have in terms of tax revenue and other opportunities for sustaining businesses and growing businesses in the county. Are there any comments or thoughts or questions? Yes, sir.
Specifically, what can we do as chamber members, board members, to help the transportation?
We're going to be coming up with a strategy here shortly that we'll
Okay.
be sharing with the board of directors.
So we're going to be more active and up
Yeah.
front?
Mhm.
Okay.
And we'll be sharing that with everybody.
And
here
thanks to
shortly.
some of the input here today, we're going to include those elements as things that need to have some integration into that strategy.
We're close to wrap up perhaps, so I'll be quick, but I did hear one road that should be on the list for consideration is the long-standing goal of connectivity to Dulles. Notice I didn't call it the Bytown Parkway. I'll call it the Lever Road to Route 28. Direct benefit to economic development, to George Mason. Long chamber goal to have that connectivity. That ought to be examined. Is it an appropriate road to fund with a bond referendum? If it is not, is it an appropriate state priority? How do we get that done?
Either of you want to comment on that? Or?
I waited till the last minute to put
Yeah,
that.
I know what the chamber answer will probably be with that, but you don't have to.
No, yeah.
It's private, he's in the private sector now.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
control,
I'm free to
right?
talk. You know the history of this
I do.
as well as anyone. And of course, all those points you made about economic development, innovation in particular, getting to Dulles and getting from Dulles to here is huge. And I think, from my perspective, that would be a great transportation alternative. Ground transportation. As you know, it has a huge group that is advocating against ever building anything. It goes right through the Fairfax Bull Run Park. Friends of Bull Run Park's a very active group, and they have been very, very successful at blocking it on I think 3 occasions where the EIS has been undertaken. So again, I think it needs to be carefully looked at to see, again, from a local perspective, we can only go to Bull Run. And that doesn't do you much good. I would draw a comparison to Ridgefield Road. Ridgefield Road, you know, that was the eastern kind of counterpart to the 28 bypass. And we got a nice 4-lane road that stops.
Goes to an HOA?
Yeah.
Goes to this beautiful HOA road in the region, right?
Back to the segments that you were talking about.
Right.
I don't see this, there's a comp plan piece to that.
Right.
Like the Tri-County Parkway, the Godwin Drive extension.
Right.
We're building a variation of that to run parallel to 28. We're working on, not building it yet, we're working on that to then connect into what will eventually be the 7-lane section in Fairfax County. In terms of the controversial Bi-County Parkway, that's not on our comp plan right now.
Right.
There's been a lot of discussion on the board about the notion that because we took this one road off, we didn't replace it, so now our comp plan doesn't show a connection from 234 anyway. I mean, you don't like the Bi-County Parkway, then the question becomes, okay, so what do you like? Do you want to go to the east, do you want to go to the west? We still have to get to Route 50 somehow, eventually. That's something that we probably are not in a position to talk about until the board figures out through our comp plan update what we'd want that to look like.
But there has been a change in feeling for some of the landowners, and some of the landowners near the battlefield have changed their mind about the feeling, about the parkway going through. It goes through my property inadvertently because it avoids a dump of a historic house with black mold on the asphalt shingles. But it goes through our HOA, and I am for it because we need it, even though it goes through my property. I think it's important. I see the need every day for cars going north. One of the problems is this part of the county is in the rural crescent, and the county would benefit in no way by having a parkway through it unless there's a change. I mean, it's going to be a speedway from wherever to Loudoun County. The parkway Prince William benefits in no way financially by having the parkway go through that part of the county unless there's a change in zoning.
And what we're going to do from here, since we are running a little over time, is I'm sure that Supervisor Nohe and Mr. Blaser will be more than happy to stay and talk with you. I know Supervisor Nohe will.
I'll get to the axe ribbon cutting.
Oh, yes, so do I. But real quick, just some quick announcements before we close the meeting. Supervisor Nohe kind of alluded to both of these, but on September 10th, we have GSA coming to talk to our Economic Development Committee. That's Monday, September 10th from 1:30 to 2:30. They're going to be discussing what they look at when they are looking at relocating leases. On September 12th, next policy committee meeting, we're going to be discussing the county's moonshot goal. We're going to have Chris Price, the deputy county executive, and a few representatives from economic development here discussing that with us. This Friday, we have a mega networking event from 8:30 to 11 at the Battlefield Inn over in Manassas. On August 22nd, we have another business after hours at Grassroots Communication from 5 to 6:30. On August 29th, the Northern Virginia Regional Chambers, all of us together, are hosting an Elected Leaders Summit, and that'll be over at the Northern Virginia Community College campus in Manassas, over in Loudoun. And then on August 30th, we're having a meet and greet with our Manassas Park elected officials, and all are welcome to attend. Thank you all so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.